All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler Hour after a couple of weeks off here. Tuesdays, Thursdays, 2 p.m. This is our spot. It's definitely a weird time to be coming back. Obviously, we just had Christmas. We have New Year's coming up. Lots going on here in Nashville. But we just figured we want to process everything together and with you guys. And if you have anything you want to say along the way, don't forget, this is your time to jump in with us. You can message us on Facebook or on Twitter for the link and jump into the Holler Hour. Also go to tnholler.com to help us out and chip in. A few bucks a month goes a long way. You're the reason we've been able to spread out throughout the state. And we actually have a brand new holler that just started this week in Murray County, which we're super excited about. So check out the Murray County Holler, Murray Holler on Twitter and Facebook. They're going to be covering Columbia and Spring Hill and probably even all the way down to Lawrence because we don't have one down there yet. But if anything happens in that area, make sure to send it to the Murray County Holler. It's pretty exciting, Cassie. We have another holler that just launched.
I know. I'm so excited about it. It's nice to kind of be branching like a little bit west in the state, a little bit more. We've got some gaps to fill there eventually, and Murray is a big part of that. So I'm super excited to have the Murray Holler up and running. And yeah, just feel free. If you're in that area, please follow them on Facebook and Twitter at Murray Holler and send them tips and highlight their stuff. Make sure to spread the word.
Absolutely. Send them tips. And, really your contributions have been what has helped us expand like this. So thank you so much to everybody. It really, really helps when you chip in the way you have. And we really can't express our appreciation enough. And also, if you think there's a spot that should have a holler in Tennessee that doesn't, definitely reach out and message us. We'd love to talk about it. A lot of these hollers are popping up because people have been like, hey, we need one here. And then they reach out and it's a fit. So we really want to make sure that we're as many places as we can be. Obviously, the first thing we need to talk about, because we haven't talked about it yet, is what happened in Nashville on Christmas morning. A lot has happened. We've processed it now. We've learned that the guy, we were not going to say his name or flash his picture, but the terrorist, we will say that, the bomber killed himself in the blast. He was in an RV playing a really creepy soundtrack as the Nashville police were evacuating people, and amazingly, nobody was killed. These are the 6 officers who were on the scene when it happened. They deserve a lot of credit. And one thing we're going to talk about here in a minute is sort of the false equivalence that's being made between, a lot of people are saying, oh, the police do good things, therefore don't defund the police. We should be able to praise what good police do without dismissing the problems in law enforcement entirely. But before we get into that, unless you want to go to that right now, I did want to kind of go and play the body cam footage and walk through that, because it's pretty incredible, this body cam footage that we saw from Officer Sipos. He was wearing a camera, and they just recently released it, and it's really just an incredible thing to see the body cam footage as they were wearing it, and watch how calmly they really processed everything. So you're not doing anything wrong, okay? So they're clearing out, I think, homeless people in the area, telling them they need to go somewhere else and they don't want them to get hurt.
Right.
And then this is the RV saying this creepy message.
That's so weird. That's like something out of a movie.
He says that's like something out of a movie, and she then says, like, The Purge. I mean, it's fascinating to hear the officers say what we say when we see it. Like, we've all been saying it's like something out of a movie. That was their initial reaction.
Yeah.
And there's the RV on the left. And then an officer comes up to Officer Sipos here, and he says he found out that the building the RV was parked next to is headquarters for landlines throughout the Southeast, which we now know is why we had so much trouble with our communications in the aftermath, and maybe part of the motive. We don't know the motive.
That building that it's next to is the building that houses all the hard lines for phones throughout the Southeast.
Makes sense. Good spot for the bomb.
Good spot for the bomb, Saipo says. I mean, they're so casual and calm about it. It's wild to think like they are definitely taking this seriously, but they're also, you know, calm and collected about it, even to the point when the bomb goes off, which is coming up right here. So it just happened. Puts on his vest. That's Officer Wells, who was really close to the blast when it happened and apparently had temporary hearing loss. He's on the radio saying, "I'm good," because they had lost him on the radio for a minute.
Command, I need all resources out on this call. I believe we have everyone except for 425.
He says he's good. And this is the part that really gets me right here. When the father and his daughter are running out. I mean, that's a big guy who doesn't know what to do. He's carrying his daughter just in a pure panic. I mean, imagine the chaos and confusion he must be going through. You know, and I mean, really, we can just kind of skip forward to the end here, but just to watch the actual insanity that was the blast. I know it's hard for a lot of people to watch, but, you know, I feel like we need to process it the way they did. Oh, the video's skipping. Anyway, we can get out of that. But the bottom line is it's really amazing to watch them process this, go through it quickly, you know, stay calm. And they must all be in shock. You know, they had a moment afterward when they had their press conference where they had a group hug. And, you know, it's definitely praiseworthy what these officers did. And, you know, I don't want to take anything away from any of that. We definitely are critical of law enforcement when we need to be on here. And certainly this does nothing to erase or eradicate the problems that we've seen with law enforcement in this country. And now we've seen people get on, you know, and say things like they're the only reason the casualties in the bombing. Think about that the next time you want to defund the police. And I think we should be able to have a frank discussion, which, you know, I'll turn it over to you here. But, you know, we should be able to lift up good policing and also be critical of bad policing and make a point about the way we fund things.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the fact that, you know, we need to lift up I mean, it was just objectively what these officers did, you know, was a very good thing and a very, you know, brave thing to do. I think that's an objective fact. And I think that, you know, being able to live in the nuance of being able to praise the actions of these officers, of these people, you know, that helped, you know, move people out of danger, out of harm's way on Christmas Day, you know, which probably a lot of them were celebrating, I would assume. You know, and so that's, you know, that's a real thing. That is a very real thing that happened. And I think that being able to live in the nuance of acknowledging that, but also acknowledging that the institution of the police needs, you know, I support defunding the police, and I support reallocating those funds to other community areas that need that funding. However, I think that it's possible for people to understand both of those things at once, and that is how we have to look at stuff like this in order to really move forward, because it's not always like so cut and dry.
It's to misunderstand the point of what defunding the police means. Right. And yes, you can blame that on the phrase itself at times, you know, and we can have a discussion about that. I mean, I know staunch progressive activists who are willing to have a conversation about how effective the phrase defund the police is, but that doesn't change the point of defunding the police as an act and steering resources to more preventative measures, not asking police to be mental health experts, you know, dealing with de-escalation in that way. So, you know, these are sort of two separate conversations. They're part of one conversation, but just because police do something good doesn't mean that there aren't problems any more so than that would be the case in any other profession. Just because, a doctor does something good doesn't mean there's not malpractice. That's just not the conversation we're having here. And it feels like a bad faith argument, frankly, to come around and say, okay, now you don't want to defund the police because these guys showed bravery. No, and that's not the point. You're missing the point conversation. I think that's that's an important point to make. And I saw that you brought this in. This was Justin Jones who said, that some are using this to promote the ideology of Blue Lives Matter and pro-policing. We're grateful for the actions of the officers. It doesn't negate a key lesson that our overall system of policing is still harmful. And I think we would both support Justin in that point. So we don't want to belabor this too long, but we do want to make the point that you should be able to do both things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's institution versus individual action. So, I mean, it's possible to have this nuance. I think that it's important to remember the nuance of this, and to not fall prey to, black and white arguments about like, oh, well, they did this good thing, so therefore we shouldn't defund the police. And as you said, I think that overall is a bad faith argument, and that people need to be careful. Just to, if you do fall on the progressive side of things, if you do support, defunding the police in the ways that it actually means, which we can have a whole conversation about that. Yeah. But because the phrase is, specific and it's meant to be specific. But anyway, but yeah, I think that it's just important to be able to live in that nuance and that it's possible to do that.
Another aspect of this conversation that has come up is the unwillingness of many to call this terrorism, which, I think we can say pretty safely that if this had been perpetrated by a brown man, it would be terrorism already, no matter what the motivation was. And, here we have I think I'm on as Muslims editing this headline that says a quiet life, a thunderous death, and a nightmare that shook Nashville. I mean, it's just like they go out of their way to be poetic and attribute empathy to the plight of the perpetrator. No, he's a suicide bomber who targeted Nashville. He's a terrorist. Whether he was like in his feelings shouldn't matter. You wouldn't be asking yourself about that, about the World Trade Center bombers. And, we need to be really clear about the difference in the way that we react and label things based on skin color. And it couldn't be more obvious. And City Councilman Bob Mendez was asked about this, and he had a rant saying, a national media outlet, he's a Nashville city councilman, just asked whether it was terrorism. I said, yes. We don't know the details, but basically he said, the FBI defines domestic terrorism as violent criminal acts by individuals, political, religious, social, racial by nature. And he goes on to say, yes, no matter what his motivation was, no matter what his motive was, there is no motive you could ascribe to this that makes it not terrorism. Like, what is the motive where you could come up and say, oh, don't worry, that's just what? No. And I know that it triggers different things and there are definitions throughout government, but no, this is terrorism. This is going to terrorize that area for a long time to come. A neighbor of mine just had 2 of his restaurants decimated. People are not going to go down there for a while. He's going to have to go take his restaurant somewhere else probably. This is terrorism. By any rational definition, this is terrorism. And, we can't fall into the trap of not immediately going there where we know we would go if the perpetrator had brown skin.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying about the way that, we react to folks with, brown skin versus how, that New York Times headline was patently absurd. Yeah. Like they would have never written that headline had it been a brown person of any racial background other than being white had perpetrated this act. And so I 100% agree with the absurd, reactions and the sort of like coddling of like, oh, well, his mental health. Oh, well, blah, blah, blah. There's so many people with mental health issues in this country that don't blow up buildings every day. Yeah, I mean, my God, it's insane.
It's actually almost
offensive, like to people
who have mental health issues. Like,
of course,
to say, right? Exactly. It's like
so offensive.
Blame it on that, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, all of that is patently absurd. And the one area of this that I want to hear your opinion on, because I do think that there is an argument to be made for overall moving past the term terrorism altogether, like when it comes to anybody.
Sure.
And there's this really great quote by Sam Adler Bell, who's just a really smart dude. I respect him a lot. He said, those of us who oppose the crimes against humanity and constitutional principle undertaken under the aegis, under the backing of anti-terrorism, must be able to criticize the racist underpinnings of the term without abetting its proliferation, which is kind of like a complicated quote. But like, you know, essentially this term has been used a lot in the past when referring to brown people, you know, like to propagate US imperialism. And so like the term itself is problematic, even when applied to like white people. And so I just wonder what, you know,
I mean, I think we could have a
think
longer
about that.
conversation about that. I think my complaint right now is rooted in the idea that we definitely would be calling it that if this was a
For
black
sure.
or brown person.
Completely
So
agree with that.
to like make this the moment where we decide to do away with that term, you know.
But this
to help-
conversation has
yeah.
been had before. Like it has
Of
been
course,
had.
of course it has.
other-
And
yeah.
sure, you know, and I think it's a fair one to have. But let's just put it this way. If blowing up, you know, the World Trade Center, or if blowing up, you know, if perpetrating anything else that a Muslim extreme, or not even Muslim, an extremist has before that has been referred to as terrorism, so is this. And, you know,
Yeah.
this isn't any less terroristic
No, I
than
agree with that.
anything, you know, done by suicide bombers in Iraq to blow up, you know, American troops. And if you want to get into like digging into the motivations of these people and trying to find their humanity, you must do it with those other people also. You must do it with the suicide bomber in Iraq. You must do it with the guys who flew that plane into that building. Why were they doing it? You never ask yourself that question.
Of
Shouldn't
course.
be asking yourself a question about this guy either if you're going to go there. If you want to ask it about everybody and not
And I
just
do.
ascribe, you know, that's
what
fine.
I am advocating for.
I think that's a fair conversation to have, but it feels like they're excusing this somehow because he was a loner white guy
for
who
sure.
was, you know, maybe down on his life or down on his luck. And, you know, that to me is completely inexcusable. One of the details of this that, you know, we've learned since is a neighbor said that the bombing suspect told him days before the Christmas explosion that Nashville and the world is never going to forget me. Now, if somebody says that to you, that you don't really know, that is kind of a creepy loner person with a bunch of cameras and an antenna that you never really see interacting with human beings, tell somebody. I mean, this was the guy in the same article says there were no red flags. And then he says he said this. Like, how is that not a red flag? I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's definitely a flag. That is a huge red flag. It's
right. This isn't like your daughter saying, you know, I'm going to be a dancer and people are going to really respect my career. No, this is, or your son. This is, you know, a clear red flag. And it's pretty wild to me that didn't cause him to call somebody.
And the people that are saying that, like, oh, well, he wasn't really, you know, he did a good job of trying to, you know, not hurt anyone because he had the countdown timer and he did, you know, he bombed a major part of Nashville.
Yeah,
like,
I have no sympathy for that.
There's like just all, and that goes along with the New York Times headline, like just all of the excuses for this, you know, this horrific act, this thing that just shook Nashville. And luckily, it was luck that it didn't injure more people or kill anyone. Like it's
wild how far out of their way people have gone to make excuses. And you know, I've already seen, I'm sure you have too, the right-wing conspiracy fever swamps have been going crazy, saying that it was a missile, saying that, you know, it was to stop AT&T from counting the votes. They tried to blame it on Democrats, say that AT&T has a contract with Dominion Software. I mean, the places they go, there's no evidence of that. The missile thing, I went down that rabbit hole, saw the streak coming in the sky beforehand.
I think maybe we lost Justin for a sec.
Oh, you lost me? Am I here?
Sorry, we lost you for a second.
Am I back?
You just froze for a sec. But I think you're back now. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Anyway, there was a missile rabbit hole. I saw Phil Williams attack that stuff. And, you know, I don't want to go too far into the details of that, but I think the issue that I would like to bring up on that front is, do you attack those theories? Like Phil Williams was pretty unapologetic about bringing up the theories and knocking them down, you know, and then I saw people criticizing him saying, don't give them oxygen. personally, I think he did the right thing. Like, I think you do want to mention those things. Otherwise, they fester, they take on a life of their own. I think it's important when they gain a certain amount of steam to take them on head on and point out how absurd they are. I had some of these things getting sent to me, not just, from our inboxes, but like on a group thread I'm on with people in my life. Somebody was saying that stuff. And like, so it was out there. It's all coming from like a central place. It's intentional. And I think it's important to name and shame that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also nuance with this. I think that, if there's things like this that are starting, that are coming out, that it's important to fact check them and to go back and, just explain why that is not the case. And for that to get some attention, to make sure that people see this information as much as possible. But yeah, you're right. At a certain point, like, we don't want to give life or give volume or direct more people to these types of conspiracies.
Like we have one here in our comments right now.
Yep, it's happening right now.
No blast crater exists on the public street. There is quite a large crater in the buildings around it. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that Christian Rosenkreitz does not have a explosives license or expertise, and the idea that it's a missile, wouldn't the missile create a crater? I mean, I don't want to get into all this, but like, pretty clearly these police were on that street. We've seen their body cam. We've seen the image of the thing blowing up in high def that the police released. And when you're going to go down this road, like saying no crater exists where it explodes, like there's just going to be no talking to you about this stuff. You're not going to buy it no matter what we say. So you're entitled to believe the things that you want to believe, but I think it really does a great injustice to the police that were there. I think it does a great injustice to the people who lost their buildings. And if you can prove something, great. But until then, these are just theories. I've heard 15, 20 of them already. Yeah. And, I don't really understand what you think is going on here, but
it's like loosely tied together. Like, I don't know, like all of these things. Oh, he says who's talking about a missile.
Plenty of people are talking about a missile. Go ahead, go on Twitter or go on Google, Christian, and Google Nashville missile. You'll see it all over the place. A lot of people are talking about a missile. There's a video where a guy breaks it down. I'm sure you'll watch it and agree with him. I don't. I've also seen them say the RV that was in the guy's backyard is different than the one that the FBI put out a picture of. I disagree with that too. I've seen both those pictures.
The evidence
so
is
everybody's just, and I look, I will admit, I am a skeptical person by nature. Yeah. I'm not above a good conspiracy theory here and there. We did some digging as things were going on. We actually uncovered one thing, I think, pretty early, which was that video of the music playing and then the explosion turned out to be the real thing. We were one of the first to post that video. I don't want to watch it because we just watched the explosion. And then also we got a tip about the woman who was on the receiving end of the house. And I actually Facebook messaged her. I'm not going to say her name either because I don't want to dox her, but I messaged her on Facebook. 1 minute later, she deleted her Facebook, and she has now become at the center of this thing. And I've heard this and that about how she's involved. I don't think she's involved with what happened, but I do think she knew him. And I think she didn't know that he was giving her this house. There's a weird relationship there. Anyway, the point is, digging is good. Like, I don't mind that. I actually think the police even ascribe how they found the RV and the guy to a tip that they got from people online. So that stuff is good. But let's just not fly off the handle about, what we think happened here. This is clearly a guy who his neighbors will even tell you was, kind of off the radar. So did the woman says the same thing. He has electronics background. There's a story here that makes sense. You don't have to make it not make sense unless you want to. So,
Yeah. And I think that just like going for, like, it's, as you said, like digging is good. But I also, and I think that, being skeptical, like, I'm not saying in this situation, I'm just saying like broadly, like there have been, in the past, just relying only on police reports can be problematic.
Oh, 100%.
And I know you agree with that, but I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying like to other people, like in general, like I understand all of that skepticism. And so, however, if you're going to come up with a theory and you don't have the backing for it and the expert, people who are experts in their field, who also like corroborate and all of this other evidence, then I think that, asserting these things as truth, you're what you're saying needs to have proportional evidence to what you're claiming. Like your claims need to have proportional evidence. And if they don't, then you shouldn't claim them. And I think that's very
100%.
irresponsible.
Right. And I see he keeps saying there's no blast crater. Well, like, I'm not an explosives expert. I doubt you are. Like, maybe sometimes there's not, I just like
I have
something
no
exploded,
idea.
Like we know something exploded. There's damage everywhere. To just tell us it couldn't have been the RV when the RV was clearly in these videos, like, and the RV's gone after the video. Like, why? What's the theory? I still don't understand the theory, but appreciate you watching, Christian. I will watch that link that you. I think it's important to ask questions, but a lot of people immediately were like, "Oh, the Democrats," or whatever. Like
that's connecting so many different conspiracy theories together, like just weaving them together.
And I'll leave it on the other side too. People are obviously very quick to say must have been a Trumper, must have been QAnon.
Yeah.
Like that's happening on the other side too. We've been asked over and over again, is it a Trumper? Is it a Trumper? Is it a Trumper?
I
have no evidence of that. None. No. And so I'm not going to guess. I'm not going to say was or wasn't. His neighbors say he didn't put out yard signs. They don't know what his political affiliation was. I don't know. And until we know, we're not going to guess because that's just not the right thing to do. So that should be true on both sides. And, I think probably we need to leave it there for now. But the bottom line is it's an absolute miracle that nobody died, nobody got hurt other than the bomber. And we would very much like to know why. Maybe we will get a sense of that down the line, but we simply don't have it now. And there have been instances, unfortunately, frustratingly, like the Las Vegas shooter, where we don't know. So, we may not know. That may sound convenient to some, and I agree it's frustrating, but that doesn't mean we need to go around deciding it for them. And, so that's just, I think, where we should leave that. Do you have anything else on that before we move on to the Grinches that are trying to steal Christmas?
No, I think we've pretty well exhausted that. And I just want to reiterate again that I'm glad that, that there was minimal damage to people, the buildings, the businesses. That's horrible. And I hope that, they get the support that they need to recover as quickly as possible. But, it was a very traumatic day for Nashville. And I'm just glad that the injuries were as minimal as possible.
And I see this guy, he's saying Christians over and over again that there's no blast crater. Okay. I don't know that anytime anything explodes, you must have a blast crater or nothing exploded. Like, I don't know that you know that either. And, I will look that up, but I'm not an explosives expert and neither are you, I don't think. If you are, fantastic, congratulations. And
come on the show.
You should probably come on the show and tell us about it. Let's move on to the Grinches that are stealing Christmas. This was yesterday. Was it yesterday? I'm losing track of the days. Yeah, last night, the House passed this bill that amends the $600 stimulus checks to $2,000 each. This is supported by Democrats, except for two who I forget their names, but they should be shamed. And Trump also supports this, as do 78% of the country, including a majority of Republicans. They support expanding the $600 per person checks to $2,000 per person, which would still not be anywhere remotely close to what other countries are giving their people who have been paying their people to stay home for a long time. It still doesn't come anywhere close to what billionaires have made just over the course of the last year. They've added $1 trillion to their wealth over the course of the last year. And, we have now seen that all of the Republican congressmen in Tennessee, and I'm including Dr. Phil Rowe in this, even though he abstained, because that is just garbage. That's as good as a no, in my opinion. All of them voted against $2,000 per person, against Trump, against 78% of this country, against the Democrats who have been fighting for more money for you for a very long time. How many different ways do Republicans need to show us that they don't care about you until you get it? They don't care about you. They all had their different reasons. Mark Green said he didn't want our children paying for it. Even though Mark Green is worth $29 million as of last year, probably more now, and, has an equestrian ring in his backyard. But no, he doesn't think you should have $2,000. Burchett just got on. I don't have the clip, sadly, but he just went on Fox.
Yeah, let them eat cake.
And he used the phrase, let them eat cake, as though the Democrats are saying that when the phrase means to let people starve, and he just voted against giving people who are starving money. Tim
I
Burchett
want to ask
doesn't seem
him.
to understand how the world works, and he's using quotes he doesn't understand. Tim, get it together, man.
I want to ask him what he thinks happened to Marie Antoinette after she said that.
Exactly. Exactly. She lost her head, brother. Like,
Yeah.
Burchett, don't say things you don't understand. It's really makes me uncomfortable for you. And then, of course, we have Marsha Blackburn tweeting, Americans do not want a socialist country, and we will not let the radical left force it on them. This is all she ever says.
She doesn't know how to say anything else on Twitter except for that and being racist towards China. That's it.
Unbelievable. And, you know, so, okay, $2,000 per person is socialism. Does that mean Trump is socialist? Does that mean Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are now socialists? Like, you can just call everything socialism because this is what politicians owned by rich people do to keep the government from helping regular people. They just scream about socialism. This has been happening. I've been watching The Crown. That's what the show on binge.
Oh, yeah.
The Crown in the 60s, conservative politicians in England were calling lefties socialists. That's what they've been doing for our entire lives. They call people socialists when they want to fight for working people. And anybody who doesn't see through that is falling for it. And anybody helps them do that is hurting themselves.
Yeah, that is, it truly is like tale as old as time. If you like, if you go through like US history and just look at it through a working, their working class history perspectives, like a people's history of the United States, for example, and there are countless others that you can read. And this has been happening forever. And the fact that we keep falling for it is because it's because this propaganda has worked so well on us.
Right. There's a reason they keep doing it. It's because it works. And why does it work? It works because regular people help them do it. Like, you're yelling about socialism, but these programs help you. You know, public schools, the military, police. You're like, you don't want to defund the police, but then you're crying about socialism. Like, who do you think pays for the police?
That's one of the biggest programs in the country that's funded by the government.
Exactly.
And so, and
roads.
I don't know. It's incredibly frustrating, and just the fact that it works. But it's because those it's because, and we harp on this all the time, but it is always true. It's because it protects the status quo and the moneyed interests behind it, both in government and in the private sector. They work together, and that's also what funds like the largest media organizations in this country. And I'm not like broad stroking, like saying that, our mainstream media is fake news. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that we don't hear a lot about why, about like a worker's perspective on major news organizations because
100%.
of the financial underpinnings.
I completely agree with you. Like, we don't hear the word workers coming from talking heads often. I mean, there is some of that, but like, Democracy Now! Is not a mainstream network,
right?
And like the Young Turks is not a mainstream network. The Holler is not a mainstream network, like we are much more free to scream about the things we scream about because we aren't beholden to those special interests that pay the bills at, multimedia, multinational conglomerates like CNN and MSNBC and Fox, and it's sad. They're not all equal on that level.
No,
some of
not
them
equating
do a better
with
job.
Fox.
Yes, but at the end of the day, this socialism garbage, it's literally going to be taking money out of your pockets at this point. We're now at a point where in the Senate, 52 Republicans stand between you and $2,000 in your pocket, while food lines are, miles and miles long and people are facing eviction. This is absolutely the right thing to do. And we've seen Tennessee Republicans like John Rose, David Kustoff, Scott Desjardins, and yes, of course, my pal Mark Green, and not to mention Burchett and Chuck Fleischman and Phil Rowe not voting to put money in your pocket. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is saying that he's going to delay Trump's defense bill veto, the override of it that's supposed to happen in the Senate, until McConnell introduces a bill that introduces the House bill to up the $600 checks to $2,000. So Bernie's playing hardball. McConnell just blocked it a couple of hours ago. There were some impassioned speeches by Murphy and Schumer and Bernie that were explaining why we need to do this, and McConnell blocked it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But, people are saying this is performative and Democrats are trying to jam it through. All politics is performative. And it's important to show, that these people are not on the people's side. And
Yep.
they have a point, because now Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, after saying $600 was socialism, are now for $2,000 because they're afraid of Trump and Trump's people. So the Democrats, Republicans have been pantsed.
Yes, I think that this is a really important lesson, I hope, because this is honestly, at least in my more recent memory, this is one of the most exciting, in a good way, moments in politics. I know that I really hope that we get this $2,000, because honestly, we need them to be recurring, as Pramila Jayapal said, to be honest. But I think that it is an exciting moment, because if we actually get this, then it would be actually a really good thing for the American people.
Yeah.
And it's also showing that the way that the Democrats, the fact that they have been talking about this issue, like this is something that Democrats, Schumer, Sanders, so many of them have been, and in Georgia, that's been incredibly important. That's what got Loeffler and Perdue to switch. And so the fact that the Democrats have been really harping on this, that talking about it, going on TV, talking about this, using the political leverage. Sanders is using these procedural methods in the Senate, or he did earlier today, use these procedural methods in the Senate that we just don't often use. And so there's so much political capital that Democrats don't often spend that's being spent now. And it's really showing how it can, if you get behind a popular issue that is good for people and you really run it home, then that's going to be good for you and your party strategically in the long term. And it's good
honestly,
for people.
This one was like a layup. It's literally money in people's pockets.
It is.
You're not asking everybody to understand anything here.
But it oftentimes doesn't even happen. And so this was an easy one, but there have been easy ones in the past that just don't even happen. So I think I
don't know if there have been easy ones in the past that even Republicans support to the tune of,
but I think it's because
it's
because we're using but I think it's because we're that leverage is being used now that wasn't used in the past. Obviously, I don't have the numbers on
By the way, I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that. What I'm sort of saying, I'm not ready to give them a ton of credit for this, because it's such an easy one. I'm more saying, they're doing the right thing, and they should do this more, of course, but $2,000 in people's pockets. It's super popular. Trump's for it. There was no way for them not to take this stand.
You're totally right. You're totally right about that. I totally agree. But I think that what I'm saying, I guess, is that I hope that they learn a lesson from this also. That using as much political capital, and I understand using it strategically, but using as much of it as you can to get things that are popular done for people, because we talk about Medicare for all the time, and there's been a debate about a floor vote, which we don't have to get into that right now. But I think that, it's a popular policy that the majority of America supports, just like these checks are. Obviously, it's a much more complicated issue. But it's democracy is when our government reflects the will of the people. And and that's what's happening now with these checks, at least. And it's because they're using more tools than they have on other issues in the past. And I hope that continues.
The thing that I would like to see that I feel like doesn't happen enough, which, we're trying to do it a little bit here, but when these things happen, right now, in this moment, when McConnell just blocked this thing, there should be a rapid response, graphics like we're doing. There just needs to be an education. Facebook makes it so easy to reach so many people. Who is pushing the idea that look who's fighting for you right now in this moment. If you had elected other people like this person, you would have $2,000 in your pocket. We're just expecting that to filter down to people who don't watch the same shows we watch or get their information from the same place. There needs to be, a war chest that is dedicated to these moments when we're not in an election, to explain to people, to help with the branding, frankly, of Democrats and progressives and people who are fighting for this stuff, to show them who's on your side in this moment. And without that, you end up just people are not even going to realize what happened. Like, it's going to
Right.
happen. They won't get their checks, whatever, and nobody's going to know who to blame. Nobody's going to know like which party fought for it. People are going to think Trump fought for it and Democrats didn't. And I've already seen people saying, "Oh, the Democrats had their chance to da 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 da." It's like, no, they've been fighting for this the whole time, and Republicans have been pushing against it. You just getting all this misinformation. Who's fighting against that misinformation? And there's not enough of a coordinated effort to do so all year round, as opposed to just for 3 months when there's an election happening.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, is just how information is disseminated and how, just like what media people are consuming and what they understand, the education of the populace. I mean, I think that the more of that can happen from progressive areas, the better.
Right.
Like long term, short term, everything.
All right. Well, so I think we vented enough about a couple of these things. Just a couple of things I wanted to flash here. One is this op-ed by the New York Post editorial board telling Trump to stop the insanity, because we're coming up next week on January 6th, which I think January 5th is going to be the election in Georgia, and then the 6th is the Electoral College thing that I think Republicans are going to probably try to take a stand and steal the election, at least a few of them, and we know that our Republicans in Tennessee will do it. But even the Post editorial board is telling them to stop it. Rep. Kinzinger, who is a Republican, accused Trump and grifters of pushing the electoral challenge to raise money, which is absolutely what they're doing. They're raising hundreds of millions of dollars off of this Stop the Steal grift. And, I listened to Steve Bannon, so you don't have to. And even still today and yesterday, Steve Bannon is telling his people on his podcast that Trump will be the president next year also. And what he's basically teeing up to do is he's going to say this until it doesn't happen, and then he's going to blame the Republicans who didn't fight hard enough. He's going to blame McConnell, blame Lindsey Graham, blame the New York Post, blame Fox News. They're going to blame everybody else, even though they've been selling snake oil this whole time. Then they're going to turn around and say, "Oh, it would have worked if it wasn't for these, rhinos or whatever." And that'll set up some real serious infighting, I think, on their side in the coming days. And it may end up costing them the Senate, because it's sort of why Lynn Wood and other people are telling them not to show up and vote this time. Because how do you say it was rigged and then say also you got to show up and vote, right? It doesn't make a whole ton of sense. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I personally don't feel like there's any chance of anything really going wrong here. It's going to be ugly. A lot of people are going to show their true colors, but the ship has sailed.
Yeah, I'm just tentative. I'm so tentative about next week, and I am obviously hoping for the best. There's some amazing organizers on the ground that have been working for this, and lots of folks that I know. I've done some phone banking, and lots of people that I know from Tennessee have been working, from making calls and stuff and doing what they can, donating. And I encourage everybody else that is able to do so as well. But yeah, on the Republican side of things, it's just a mess. I mean, it's a complete mess, and they've dug this hole for themselves. And I hope that it's, impossible for them to come back from.
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I doubt that'll happen, but
it's hard to say. This is a monumental couple of weeks here in this country. Just getting to inauguration, getting the gavel out of McConnell's hands. The next few weeks are really like, if you were ever going to give your time and energy and effort and money to this country, these 3 weeks are the time to do it. So, definitely do all you can to make calls, even go down there. We're not that far from Atlanta or from Georgia to help out. This is the time to fight. And, we'll definitely be trying to do our part with the Holler.
I mean, getting that gavel out of McConnell's hand would be massive. I mean, all he cares about is power, and he is in arguably the most, a lot of times the most powerful position in the country.
Yeah.
And just getting him out of that position would be huge, and obviously having the majority, but he stops so many bills from even coming to the floor. So before you can even have an argument about something, that passed in the House, it just stops on its face right in the Senate, because
we're seeing it right now with this $2,000. It would be nice to force people like Marsha Blackburn and Lamar Alexander to vote on this thing. But as long as McConnell's there, he just says no, doesn't have to explain himself. And, that's where things stop. So we got to get it out of his hand. We also got to get Trump to pass the torch to Biden, which is hopefully coming soon. This is a cartoon from Bennett Cartoons, who's a Chattanooga Times Free Press cartoonist who does a lot of great work. He also did this Governor Lee one that is one of my favorites.
Yes, I love this one.
So he's a guy you should follow, Bennett Cartoons. And then I also, just as a final thing, this is a image that was in Andy's Army, which is Andy Ogle's private Facebook group. He's trying to run for governor, and if you can see in the very distance back there, there's a Confederate flag right there.
Oh,
and this was liked 200 times in his private Facebook group. They actually had a little mini discussion about it there, but I think it just shows you what we're getting if Andy Ogles ends up being the governor of this state. Nobody should want that anytime soon. It's really a disturbing thing. I think that's pretty much it. We'll be back Thursday, 2 p.m. Appreciate it. Hope you guys are staying safe, and Nashville strong.
Absolutely. Nashville strong. Have a good one.